Well, hello and welcome to It's Not Over with Dr. Dan Farrell. He is currently unavailable this week. He is out of town. And so Brother Josh and myself will be filling in. And today Brother Josh will be doing today's message. And this week our main thrust is going to be missions. It is November. And so our thrust this week is going to be missions. And Brother Josh, how are you?
Usually it's you, Jordan, who's taking all this vacation time. I think Pastor Farrell must have caught what you had, huh?
Yeah, I guess so. I think he's out ministering and helping a church out in Illinois.
Yeah, that's always good to go out. So, all right, well, I'm going to be talking about today the unjust steward. And we could almost entitle this message, The United States Government, the Unjust Steward.
Wow, that's good.
And so, yeah, but I'm only talking on that a little bit. Are going to be out of Luke 16, verses 1 through 16 is what I'm going to be going through.
Okay.
But, one of the things about the things that we've been given us, the things that we have, is they've all ultimately been given to us by God. And it's our responsibility to use these goods in a way that is honoring to Him and furthers His goals. And as Christians, that's what we should do. And so that brings up a very important question with missions as our topic. What kind of a steward are you?
Right.
What kind of a steward am I? What kind of a steward are our listeners? And I think that as Americans, we waste a lot of money.
Yes, we do.
A lot of money. And so the question then is, do you manage what God has given you in a way that honors Him? Or do you squander much of it on riotous living? Because, when I think of an unjust steward, like I mentioned already, I immediately think of the United States government. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's anybody in the world who gratuitously spends money like our government does. But so before we get started, I'm gonna read Luke 16 here. But before we get started in that, I just want to tackle a couple of things here on how the government has unjustly, if you will, spent some of our tax dollars. Like, first of all, did you know that the Nevada tax code laws allow the state of Nevada to subsidize brothels for the cost of $17.5 million?
Wow.
Yeah, the state of Nevada, their tax money goes to subsidize brothels.
Wow.
So, and then here's another one. There was apparently an unused military facility that was built to the cost of $34 million. Basically, the Marines said that they didn't need it. They said, don't build it, we don't need this. But Congress pushed it through anyway, and so it was built, furnished, 60,000 square foot facility, never been used, and now it's either going to be demolished or it's going to be turned over to the Afghanistan government. $34 million. Okay, it gets worse. The militarization of our police force has cost $84.5 million. And so what we see now is we see cops with tanks, because cops need tanks.
Right.
For $84.5 million. And I guess some of that is surplus military vehicles, and so they decided, well, we'll just give them to the police. Yeah. I was born at day, but I wasn't born yesterday. Number 4. Facebook gets a $295 million tax refund.
What?
Facebook received a $295 million tax refund. The government refunded them a whole bunch of money because, Facebook isn't making billions of dollars or whatever they're making, hundreds of millions. So they needed another $295 million. Here's one that's really cool. I guess the United States Army spent $300 million on a blimp. A $300 million blimp. And this blimp was the size of a football field. The thing's massive, right? And it was designed so that it could float over battlefields in Afghanistan or something like that. But it was riddled with problems and never used.
$300 million.
$300 million. Never used.
Wow.
Healthcare.gov. Did you ever sign up? You remember when Obamacare came out? Did you ever sign up on Healthcare?
No, yeah, I have insurance.
Good, yeah. Healthcare.gov cost $379 million to launch that website. You remember what was going on with that website when it first launched?
It was crashing.
Yeah,
right?
It didn't work. It didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't work, and it didn't. I don't even know if it still does work. I guess maybe a little bit. And that cost will reach $684 million by the time all the costs have been accounted for. Like, for instance, advertising. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising to advertise this website. So, with all that money being spent, 100,000 people have signed up through the website only 100,000 people, whereas 5 million Americans saw their healthcare insurance plans canceled due to new healthcare regulations.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome, huh? So I'm still going. I got some more here, but I think I'll probably save these for later. So let's get going into the scriptures here. And Luke chapter 16. Do you want to read? How about you read verses 1 through 4, and then I'll get 5 through 8.
All right. And he said also unto the disciples, there was a certain rich man, which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, How is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. Then the steward said within himself, What shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig. To beg, I'm ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses.
So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto the first, How much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and sit down quickly, and write 50. Then said he unto another, And how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, Take thy bill, and write 80. And the Lord commended the unjust steward, because he had done wisely. For the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. And so it was during my daily Bible reading, I read through this parable, and I came across that, and that thing really threw me for a loop, because the first thing that you notice, these first 7 verses, you've got this guy who's ripping off the rich man, right?
Right.
And then at the end, in verse 8, at the conclusion of the parable, here's the rich man now commending the unjust steward.
And I think he says unjust steward, commending unjust.
And that's where I get my title from, is from that verse 8 right there, because that's where he calls him an unjust steward. And so I had to look at a couple of different things. Who is this written to, right? Because that'll help you determine what exactly is being meant here. And so we can see in verse 1 it's written to his disciples. But if you go back a couple other chapters, you can see that this is a whole bunch of parables that Jesus is that's kind of being recorded here. Right before this, I think, is the prodigal son, a very popular parable that I believe is only recorded in Luke. And so if you go back a couple of chapters, you can see that Jesus was also teaching sinners and publicans. And of course, there was also Pharisees hanging around, because they're deriding him for teaching sinners and publicans. And so with this diverse group of people being spoken to, I had a hard time figuring this out. Because, it's just so weird. Like, why would the rich man tell the unjust steward, look, you've wasted my money, basically, you've done a poor job with your stewardship, right. You're out of here. And then after he rips off the guy again, even more, by cutting the bills in half or cutting it down to cheaper, then he commends him for being wise. And so, when I think of unjust stewards, like the U.S. government, commending them is the last thing that I would want to do. So I think what we need to do is we need to look at the interpretation. And so let's read 9 through 13. You want to read that for me?
Right. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to you, to your trust, the true riches? And if ye have been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon.
And so that verse 13 right there basically sets how you're going to interpret this parable. And one of the things that is pretty important there is that, notice there's no gray area in that verse. It's one or the other. It's not, but you can't serve both. Right. You can't straddle the fence. And too often, what do we find ourselves doing as stewards of basically the Lord's money that's in our possession? We find ourselves trying to straddle that fence, of trying to keep our money, but we know we need to give, but we're kind of torn because we really want that Porsche, or something. like we have money to buy a Porsche. But So I came to this as the interpretation. I think the interpretation is pretty clear because one of the things that needs to be remembered is, again, who's he talking to? And it seems like he's talking to all of Israel. He's talking to everybody. He's talking to the Pharisees, he's talking to the sinners, he's talking to the publicans, and he's talking to his disciples. So there's nothing that needs to really narrow this down to a certain group of people. And how what I think it's talking about is how the Jews, they squandered their stewardship. Because the Jews, they had all of the advantages. Right? What is that in Romans? What does it talk about? Was there any advantage?
Yeah, and how basically, yes, they did have an advantage, and a lot of people think they didn't, but I mean, they had the oracles of God. They had the prophets. Yep. They were given so much. They were God's chosen people. They had Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Mm-hmm. So they did have an advantage.
Yeah, so the Jews, they had every excuse to receive Christ when he came, right? Mm-hmm. Of all the people, of all the nations that existed when Christ came, who should have received him? Right. The Jews.
Should have been them.
Yeah. And yet, that's not what happened. Looking back now, we can see that. And so I think that's what he's talking about here, is that they squandered their stewardship. And so he's taken it away. He's taken it away. And so now what it seems like he's talking about here is that, so here's the Jews, and they've squandered what the Lord has given them. And so now their stewardship is being taken away. They're not gonna get the kingdom. And so what they need to do is they need to make nice with the Gentiles, basically, with Rome, because they're, at this point, Israel was under the yoke of Rome. Rome ruled the world, and Rome was the one that dominated everything. And the Pharisees already were playing footsies with Rome. I mean, who are they kidding? They were trying to do everything they could. They were all into politics and maneuvering. Well, the Sadducees maybe more than the Pharisees, but still. And so it seems like what Jesus is teaching here is like, look, guys, you're done. Your stewardship's being taken away. So you'd better make to yourselves, like it says here in, verse 9, you better make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, they may receive you into everlasting habitations. And so verse 1 through 8 is talking about how you got to make nice, because when you make nice with the people who you're left with, maybe they'll at least receive you into their homes. And that's what the unjust steward is saying there in verse 3. I cannot dig. To beg, I am ashamed. He's saying, I can't work hard, and I'm not going to go and beg, so I'd better make sure that I set myself up so that when I'm cast out of my stewardship, that I've got somewhere to go. But notice Jesus mocks him in verse 9. That's what's happening, because this verse really threw me too. In verse 9, he says, again, and I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. And so he's saying to those Sadducees, he's saying, you go and love your money. You do that. And when it fails you, let's see that get you into heaven.
Yeah,
that's what he's saying. And so we've got some more that we'll continue with tomorrow. And Jordan, why don't you give us some announcements?
All right, we thank you so much for tuning in to It's Not Over with Dr. Dan Farrell, and hopefully he'll be back the next time you see us, whether on Facebook page or our YouTube channel, or even sermonaudio.com/It's Not Over. Those are a few things you can find us and get a hold of us at. We do have a main web page called morningstarnetwork.org, and it showcases such things as Antioch Baptist College, which does have a spring semester coming up near the end of January. I know it's only November, but maybe you should pray about that, and God would lead you to that. We also it showcases Lakota Christian School, which is our school here at Morningstar, Delta Force, and then It's Not Over. And so please check out morningstarnetwork.org. It is a good website, and if you have any questions as far as if you want to come visit Morningstar and you want to come meet the host of It's Not Over, you can find the address on that. You can find a phone number at morningstarnetwork.org. Also, coming up December 12th and 13th, December the 12th and 13th, Morningstar is putting on a Christmas cantata entitled King of Love. King of Love. Thank you so much for tuning in. Brother Josh is going to close right now with a few comments.
Luke 16:13 says, no servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And one of the biggest principles that Jesus Christ taught in his earthly ministry is that we must be, as Christians, separated from the world. There is no gray area. You either serve God or you serve money. And as stewards, we need to decide, what are we going to do with the things that God has given us? What will you do, Christian?